Yes.
No, I'm sorry, hang on. Lisa Lazarus is the FEI General Counsel. Lisa joins us this morning to discuss the FEI helmet rule, your questions answered. Lisa joined the FEI in May 2009 after almost 10 years at the National Football League, where she was based primarily in New York as an in-house counsel, and then more recently in London, where she was Senior Director of Business Affairs for NFL International. Between 1999 to 2005, Lisa was Labour Relations Counsel to the NFL Management Council, and during that time, she represented NFL teams in hundreds of arbitration cases between private arbitrators, many of which involved challenges to the NFL substance abuse program. Prior to becoming in-house counsel at the NFL, Lisa was a Labour and Employment Associate at the nationally acclaimed law firm Aiken, Gump, Strauss, Hauer and Feld, which acted as outside Labour counsel to the NFL. Lisa spent much of her time as a junior lawyer researching issues related to the enforceability of arbitrations in the NFL, particularly around the substance abuse program. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Lisa, and apologies for the technical delay. And with that, we will let you get started.
Terrific. Well, good morning, everyone. It's already the afternoon here in London, but I appreciate anyone who is up early to discuss the NFL's new helmet rule. The first thing I'd like to say is that the FEI is very committed to athlete safety and certainly very concerned about the potential risks inherent in the sport, and is always working with its various interest groups and stakeholders to try to minimize those risks. And obviously, the new protective headgear rule is a part of that. And I want to say a big thank you to Riders4Helmets, who have been a really huge leader, trailblazer really in this area, and have done so much good work and have supported the FEI and what it's trying to do as well. So with that, I'd simply like to explain that in January 2013, the FEI General Assembly, which is the 133 national federations that form the FEI, the International Equestrian Federation, voted into effect a new protective headgear rule that essentially tries to harmonize the helmet rules across our 8 disciplines to a certain extent. So I'll get into that a little bit more in my presentation. But going now to the PowerPoint, I think it's important to maybe potentially first define what protective headgear is. And in our rules, protective headgear is an appropriate helmet or headgear is in compliance with the applicable international testing standards. And appropriate means as a design for equestrian sport and of correct fit, because of course if you're using the wrong helmet that doesn't fit, the value or the benefits are not what we want them to be. And for certain areas, particularly event national standards. Moving on to the next slide now. When I said a moment ago, we're doing our best to harmonize the rules, we believe, or the FEI believes, that the more we can bring the disciplines in line with each other, the more effective and the more clear the rules obviously are. The system that we have right now in place in our rules is sort of a 2-tiered system. And what it does is it harmonizes the rule for when you're outside the field of play. So training, riding on the showgrounds, et cetera. And in all of those situations, if you're riding on the showgrounds, doesn't matter which discipline you're participating in, an FEI athlete, an FEI competition must wear a properly fastened protective headgear or helmet. And that's true for all disciplines. What changes and is different to discipline because our disciplines are so different from each other, and as we work through a lot of the challenges, I think, that come into play whenever you impose a sort of new landmark rule in any sport, is to sort of deal with the disciplines individually with respect to field of play and sort of go as far as we possibly can to ensure that athletes wear helmets in those disciplines. So moving on, I'm going to just sort of quickly take you through the 8 disciplines and explain the distinctions. So as I said earlier, if you're riding on the showgrounds in training at any FEI discipline, you have to wear protective headgear. In the field of play for jumping, it's, as a general rule, it's mandatory at all times, But senior athletes can remove their protective headgear for the ceremonial protocol in the arena, so during the prize giving. I know we tend to get a lot of questions on this and whether or not it's okay for a jumping rider to take off his or her helmet in the ceremonial protocol. And the answer is that right now that is not prohibited under our rules, but there are a lot of discussions happening with respect to potential changes for next year, and we are looking at whether or not it would be wise to change that and make it mandatory also in the ceremonial protocol. But for now in jumping, you are allowed to take off your helmet during that period. Moving to dressage, we like the general rules that is also mandatory at all times, but there is a very big exception in dressage, which is that athletes that are over 18 years old, riding horses that are over 7 years, can wear a top hat or bowler instead. In dressage, in the last couple of years, there's been a very strong movement to really encourage athletes to wear helmets as often as possible. And I think we've seen some really terrific examples like Isabelle Vert and Charles Desjardins, who have really, very high levels shown that they are wearing protective headgear and that's sort of the way of the future. But right now it is not required in the field of play if you're over 18 riding a horse over 7. For para dressage, it's always mandatory. For eventing, at the jumping test and cross-country test, it is mandatory, and actually it's mandatory, and that is also have the specific standard. It must either comply with the European, British, North American, or Australian, New Zealand test. So it has to be really a helmet of a certain quality and a certain level. And then for dressage, the same rules as ordinary dressage apply to the dressage phase of eventing. For endurance, you have to always wear protective headgear. You have to always wear a helmet. In driving and para-driving, it's mandatory always for children, but for adults and for adults in the Section E competition. In reining and vaulting, we don't currently have any rules prohibiting or requiring helmets in the field of play. On vaulting, we're looking at vaulting quite carefully, and so far our research in vaulting suggests that actually helmets would be less safe for those riders because their performance is really based on a certain amount of balance and precision, and the helmet would really throw that off. And that's sort of the feedback and the responses we're getting now, but we're still looking at it. And reining, there's sort of a lot of, in reining, there's a lot of, potential resistance to wearing helmets in the field of play, but we're always talking to the organizations that run reining and kind of discussing what modifications are possible for the future and what the way forward is. But for right now, there are no rules in either of those disciplines for the field of play. I'd like to conclude by saying, in terms of my opening message, that we really look at the rules as a minimum. I mean, that's the required standard, but we are doing everything to educate our stewards, our officials, our stakeholders, that we want to encourage athletes to wear protective headgear. We're specifically talking to some of the top riders, like I mentioned a few in dressage earlier, and encouraging them to be an example and to wear their helmets, to show that even if it's not required always in the field of play, that it's still the best way to compete and the safest way to compete. The other thing that we're also trying to remind stewards and officials is that it's not just having a helmet on your head that's important, but it has to actually be securely and appropriately fastened and worn in the way it's intended to be worn so that it could provide the benefit that we wanted to provide. And then also, we are also reminding regularly our riders and stakeholders that if you do have a fall, you do need to replace your protective headgear afterwards to make sure that it hasn't lost any of its effectiveness and it's still up to the standard. So with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you so much for that overview, Lisa. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you for dealing with us with the technical issues this morning. We have had a few questions coming on email, so I'll start with the first one, if I may. Just to clarify, in
Sure.
the show jumping, we've had a question asking with regards to the prize giving. I think the rule states, if I'm correct, that the rider must put their helmet back on prior to galloping, but I think the question is, do they have to have their chin strap done up?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really good question, and to be fair, it's something that we're looking at. I'll be very frank, looking at it very carefully right now because the rules aren't entirely clear on this point, and we certainly believe that it does need to be on, and the chin strap should be done up, and we're going to be clarifying that in the next version of the jumping rules, which will follow our General Assembly in November of this year.
Fantastic. Then another question here, and I apologize because it didn't specifically refer to which discipline, but the question is, would a rider physically be eliminated from a competition for breaking a helmet rule?
The issue is, it's a question of timing, right? I mean, for the most part, our intention is to really bring everyone on board to support the new rule and to get behind it and to understand and realize the benefits. And so we don't want to come right out of the sort of right with the new rule in the first year heavy on sanctions. And so what we've told the stewards is, and our officials is, if a rider is not wearing their helmet, they need to be told, you need to wear your helmet. And then if they don't, and they don't comply, then the sanction under our rules is a yellow card. Now, so I think what that means is that the issue is really addressed before the rider begins competing. If there was an unusual situation where they took their helmet or protective headgear off, for example, in eventing, they would be eliminated. But it would, of course, depend on whether or not the protective headgear is mandatory in that discipline or not. So it's difficult, as you said, to sort of answer it by reference to the discipline, but using eventing as kind of the discipline that has the most severe or serious protective headgear rules. If for some reason you started the competition with the helmet and then took it off in the middle, then yes, you would be eliminated.
Okay, great. And then we had another question here, which I believe you've pretty much answered already, but it said, at what point of a competition are riders reminded about the helmet rule? Is that at the rider briefing?
Yes, they are reminded at the rider briefing. And they're also, we communicate regularly with the national federations through our various newsletters and communications, and we encourage them to send that message out to their riders. And of course, depending on, which federation it is and how much contact they have and whether they have procedures in place to communicate with riders, of course, some national federations have the capacity to pass that message on effectively and some don't. So then we do follow it up with a rider briefing at the event itself. And particularly this year, since it's the first year that's in effect, we are really pushing, our officials and our stewards to remind riders all the time that this rule is in effect now and they do need to follow it. And certainly, if a rider is not complying, and you really would see that more frequently now with a rider sort of riding around on the showgrounds, perhaps not knowing or forgetting that they now have to do so with the helmet on, and then the stewards will remind them of that. And we have not had, to be fair, the feedback from the field, so to speak, has been very positive. I'm not aware of really any rider who, once reminded of the necessity of wearing a helmet, refused.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. The next question is, I guess this is in relation to the fact that at the Olympics last year and in major competitions, we're now seeing people, as you said, such as Charlotte and Isabel, wearing helmets at the FEI level of dressage. The question is the FEI planning to change the rule blanket so that level of rider will actually wear a helmet ultimately as well?
I'm sorry, you know what, Lindsay, you cut out for just a split second and I missed the question. Can you just repeat the end part of that question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think the question is, with regards to the fact that riders such as Charlotte and Isabel are now wearing helmets in competition, will the FEI eventually change the dressage rule such that all riders wear a helmet instead of a top hat?
I mean, that's, to be honest, I think many are hoping that's where we end up, and that's certainly the goal, because within the dressage rules, it clearly states that all athletes are encouraged to wear protective headgear at all times. But, that will really depend on the reaction within dressage and further discussions in the future. But I certainly think that's the long-term objective.
Okay, great. And I think this question came in a little later, so I believe it was possibly you may have perhaps already covered this, but it says, just to clarify, if I'm a dressage rider, do I, and this is from an FEI level dressage rider, if they are wearing the helmet on the showgrounds prior to getting into the arena, they can then switch to the top hat, obviously going into the arena. Is that rule the same? I'm sorry, they're an event rider. I've read the question wrong here. Is that the same for the event riders? Do they still have to wear a helmet before they get to the arena with the before they switch to a top hat?
Okay, so the dressage and the dressage rules and the dressage phase of eventing are the same.
Yeah.
Because eventing follows the dressage rule. And actually, it's a little bit different than that. There is discretion. If you are in the warm-up area just prior to competing, so in other words, you're warming up, 10, 15 minutes before you're about to go in for your test in dressage, then you can have the top hat bowler on then instead of the helmet. So the rider doesn't have to kind of stop the concentration, change hats, and go in. So that is considered to be sort of part of the field of play currently in the rules. Long-term objective would certainly be to move towards requiring the helmet at all times. But right now, if it's right before you're going into the competition arena, you can have the top hat or bowler on instead of a helmet.
Okay, great. And then there's a question here about how is the FEI educating officials at major events regarding the helmet rule, and also the same applying to national federations?
Yeah, as I said earlier, with respect to national federations, we do, we spoke quite a bit about the new helmet rule at our General Assembly this past November in Istanbul. And then we continually send out sort of, newsletters and reminders, and we've actually had I don't know if anyone's had the chance to see it on our website, we've had a helmet safety campaign, quite an interesting one, ongoing for the last few months, with different images that was developed for us with an ad agency to really try to drive home through images and through a kind of modern, cutting-edge campaign the importance and benefits of wearing a helmet. And we, of course, share that material with the national federations. And we encourage them to, to sort of pass it on to riders and pass it on to their national officials, et cetera. With respect to officials, we do all of our official trainings by discipline, and we do regular briefings, and just as we are continually updating our officials about changes to sort of sport rules, we make sure that they remember and are reminded of the importance of the helmet rule. And to be honest, it is a new rule, and there's always a little bit of a transition period anytime you bring in anything new that's significant. So everyone's been very supportive of it, but we're still really pushing and making sure that the officials remember the importance and remember that it's different now, and that they have an obligation to address it with any riders who aren't complying. And I think it's really going quite well, but probably, it's going to take another 6 months or so until we're really fully, as perfect as they could be with respect to enforcement.
Okay, great. Well, I think that pretty much covers all of the questions that have come in for you, Lisa. And I know we're getting close to Roy's starting time. So thank you so much again for joining us. And I do apologize for the technical issues we had today. Thank you.
No problem. I'm glad we were able to get it done, and I'm glad we were able to speak. So thank you very much.
And I would like to personally say thank you so much as well to the FEI, because I am aware of the great lengths that you are going to educate on helmet wearing. So I think that's such a wonderful thing that the FEI is really trying to educate more people on that as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lindsay, and good luck with the rest of the webinar.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.